Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rock Show. I'm Rocker Mike. We got Rob Rossi with us today. How you doing, Rob?
Pretty good.
All right. And what's that?
Pretty good.
Oh, yeah. Good. Glad to hear it. This is a very special show we have. It was kind of put together last minute, and it's going to be a tribute on the great Brian Wilson. Brian passed away on June 11th of this year, and we felt that he was such an important part of music history that we should do a special show on him. Don't you think so, Rob? I mean,
Yeah, he was the Beach Boy. He wrote a bunch of songs, and he was a legend in the thing. And you know what? We also got to throw in Slide Stone also died. Also,
yeah. Sly Stone passed away this month. We have a show planned on him coming up down the line soon.
Yeah. So
but,
we got two icons are gone.
Yeah, it was like days apart. It was like
days
apart. Yeah. And I mean, these guys they were the same age too. They were 82.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay. Now Brian Wilson is a guy that people said he was not easy to work with. He had a lot of issues. In the 60s, he had a mental breakdown. He went into recluse for a long time. Came back in the 70s, really kind of was, the leading force of the Beach Boys, really for the whole career of that band. There he is right there, young Brian Wilson. There's an older Brian Wilson. In the 60s, there really was no sound like the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson invented that sound. The harmonies, the whole surf music scene really came out of California and the Beach Boys. There were some other bands that were in the mix there too, but really the Beach Boys symbolized that whole thing. And we're talking like 61, 62. This is pre-Beatles. Okay. So Brian Wilson, absolutely. I mean, John Lennon was a tremendous Beach Boys fan. Paul McCartney. These guys were anybody that had kind of like harmonies in their music. Bands like the Beatles, bands like the Byrds, bands like Crosby, Stills, Nash.
Yeah.
They these harmonies. They may have gone in a more rock direction at that point because music was changing. But in the 60s, anybody doing anything with harmonies really just comes directly from Brian Wilson. And he was a guy that could produce. Okay, he was production wise. He was an incredible producer. He produced other people over the years, but very controlling, very kind of like Phil Spector-ish in the studio. I don't think he waved any guns around. I never heard that, but he definitely was a guy that knew what he wanted. He could hear the music in his head, and he could work with it and come up with the sound that he wanted, and he did. And it was an incredible, practically almost a 60-year career.
Yeah, definitely.
He deserves a tribute show. So let's, talk about his history a little bit. We're going to go back to his childhood. He was born June 20th, 1942. So he just fell short of his 83rd birthday when he passed away.
Yeah.
He was born in Inglewood, California, and he was the first child of Audrey and Murray Wilson. They were basically, blue-collar people. Murray was a machinist. He actually was interested in music very much. He was a part-time songwriter himself. Now, Wilson had two younger brothers, Dennis and Carl, who would, of course, be involved with the Beach Boys later on. They were born in 1944 and 1946. Now, shortly after Dennis's birth, the family moved from Inglewood to Hawthorne, California. And I wouldn't say they had the greatest childhood. Murray was a little bit abusive, psychologically and occasionally physically. Okay. Don't know the reasons for that other than, that's just how that generation was sometimes. Of course, his father might have been in the war, I'm assuming, things like that. Now, from an early age, Brian Wilson had an ear for music. Okay, he could learn songs by ear, and his father actually recalled how after hearing only a few verses of When the Caissons Go Rolling Along, which is an old song, the very young Wilson was able to reproduce the melody as a child. Okay,
Wow.
yeah. So Murray, being interested in music, kind of pushed a musical career really on all his kids. Um, Brian actually took 6 weeks of accordion lessons by the ages of 7 and 8. He performed choir solos in church, and his choir director actually declared him to have a perfect pitch in his voice at that time. Um, Carl Wilson was very interested in R&B at that time, and their uncle Charlie taught him piano. So both brothers, Carl and Brian, would frequently stay up listening to KFOX radio at the time. There was a DJ named Johnny Otis that used to play a lot of R&B music. R&B at that time was sometimes called race music. It was black music at the time. It was something that wasn't really on the radio all that much. So when you heard it, it was usually on late at night, and they were very into it. And really a lot. If you think about it, you could hear the R&B influences in what Brian did. I'll go into more of that later.
He definitely R&B influence. The
Yeah.
melody, the harmony.
Right.
Just
Absolutely.
white guys, and it turned into beach music, which was a whole other level of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he would take it to a different level.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that shortly because the band, it doesn't really take long before he starts the Beach Boys. Now, one of Brian Wilson's first forays into songwriting was when he was 9 years old. Okay. And he reinterpreted the lyrics of the old song, Oh, Susanna, like Don't You Cry for Me, that song.
Yeah.
Okay. When he was 12, his family acquired an upright piano. All right. That's one that goes on the wall. And he began teaching himself how to play piano by spending hours mastering his favorite songs. He learned how to write manuscript music through a friend of his father's. He learned how to write actual music. We're talking like 10 years old, 12 years old. All right. He also would sing in school at certain school functions. And with his family at home, he would practice. They would sing together. The two brothers, Carl and Brian, would learn harmonies. They would rehearse that a lot together. He also played piano obsessively after school when he would get home after his homework. And he would start listening to bands like the Four Freshmen and get into some of their harmonies. He had their albums. He would listen to them. And he would also try to recreate some of these harmony sounds on the piano at the same time, okay, to get this full sound. Now, in high school, he played football. He was a quarterback for the Hawthorne high school football team, and he also played baseball for the American Legion. Wow. And he ran cross country track also. Okay, so he was a bit of a jock. Okay,
yeah.
And at 15, he briefly worked part-time sweeping in a jewelry store. So he was a very busy kid.
Yeah.
And that was actually that job, sweeping up a jewelry store, was the only paid employment he ever had other than music later on.
Wow.
He never had another job after that. It was just music. So he also would work for his father on the weekends, cleaning up his machine company. Now, for his 16th birthday, he received a portable 2-track Wollensack tape recorder. And that would allow him to experiment with recording songs. You could get group vocals in one track and music in the other. And that was pretty, at the time, that was pretty state of the art. Okay.
Yeah,
I think, of course, like shortly after there would be 4 tracks, 8 tracks, 16 tracks, 32 tracks, 64 tracks, more than that. Okay. So now it's totally different world when it comes to recording music. But back in that, like if he was 16, so that was 1958. All right. That was pretty state of the art. All right. And believe me, there was stuff being released professionally on 2 tracks. All right. So wow. So he really had something there to work with. And he would involve his friends sometimes, have them come over and sing if he thought they could sing good. He would harmonize constantly with kids in school if he thought they could sing good. Everything was about these harmonies that he was trying to develop. He actually it was very devoted to music at this point. By 1959, when he was a senior, he actually submitted an essay called "My Philosophy," in which he stated that his ambitions were to make a name for himself in music. So he was devoted by the time he was a senior in high school to this. One of his earliest public performances was at a fall arts program at the high school. Okay, he enlisted his cousin and frequent singing partner Mike Love, who would eventually be in the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And he would entice Carl to be out there too to perform. They formed a kind of temporary group called Carl and the Passions, and they performed songs by Dion and the Belmonts, the Four Freshmen, and he came to the attention of one of his classmates named Al Jardine. We're going to learn about Al Jardine in a little bit. Now, in September 1960, Brian was enrolled as a psychology major at El Camino College in Los Angeles, while also pursuing music at the time. And this was a time when, the music career was not taken that seriously. I think he probably wanted something to fall back on, right? What do you think?
Yeah, probably. But he had music in his blood from a child. He was already, if you start playing and forming and doing stuff, he's almost like a genius of music,
Right.
He was a genius.
Yeah. Now, at the same time, while he was studying psychology and trying to get
playing baseball, football.
Yeah, he was doing everything. That was
everything.
Yeah. So now he's in college and he's majoring in psychology. He's also getting into music, keeping the music going. And he speaks with one of his teachers who's kind of like disappointed in pop music, doesn't like pop music. So Brian actually liked this teacher very much. So he was kind of a little disenchanted. He was a little unsure if he could do it based on the opinions of this teacher. He actually withdrew from that college after 18 months. And it was at this point he decided to go full steam ahead. And he wrote his first entirely original melody without using anything else as an influence. It was his first original melody. And that would be the song Surfer Girl, classic song.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And it was inspired by the only thing it was really inspired by was Dion and the Belmonts a little bit. They had a song called When You Wish Upon a Star. Doesn't exactly sound like it. I wouldn't say he stole the melody or anything, but I could hear the influence in that. And his high school friends kind of disputed his claim that some people said that he ripped off that song. Some people said he didn't. Doesn't matter at this point. I mean, it's a beautiful song, Surfer Girl.
It is. Yeah.
Dion never had a problem with it, so let it go, So the three Wilson brothers, which would be Dennis, Carl, and Brian, of course, and Mike Love and Al Jardine, debuted their first music group together called the Pendletones in the autumn of 1961. And it was at Dennis's suggestion that Brian and Mike Love co-wrote the group's first song called Surfin'. Not Surfin' Girl, Surfin'. All right. And Murray, their father, became their manager. Okay. So, I mean, he was inventing this new style of music that was talking about surfing and California life and stuff. That no one was talking about that.
Nobody did that. That was like that was one of a kind. They were original.
Yep. Now, this track would come out on Candix Records, Surfin', okay? And it was produced by Height and Dorinda Morgan. And it became a hit in the LA area and reached 75 on the national Billboard charts. So not bad for first time out, okay? And the group would then change their name at the request of Candix Records, and they came up with the name the Beach Boys. And it was then, that their major live debut was at the Ritchie Valens Memorial Dance on New Year's Eve of 1961. This was 2 years after Ritchie Valens passed away. They would have like memorial concerts in his name. And they actually became involved, and I guess it was probably the second one in 1961. It was at that point, only a few days earlier, that Brian had received an electric bass from his father. and he quickly learned to play that. And he prompted Al Jardine to switch to rhythm guitar at that point. I think they, not positive, but they may not have had a bass player originally. They might have had rhythm and lead and left the bass out, and they would just kind of switch things around. They realized they needed that bottom sound.
Sometimes you need that sound,
That bottom sound of the bass, yeah. So when Candix Records started facing financial difficulties and sold the Beach Boys' master recordings to another label, Murray ended their contract. As the song Surfin' faded from the charts, Wilson collaborated with local musician Gary Usher to produce some demo recordings for new tracks, including the song 409 and Surfin' Safari. 409 is one of my favorite Beach Boys songs. And Capitol Records were persuaded to release the demos as a single, achieving a double-sided national hit. So that's the old example we've talked about a million times with these old acts, double A sides.
Yeah, double A side.
Okay. So they would have a hit on both sides of the single. Cool, right?
Yeah, that was what's the funny thing about the guy was a top 40 hit just on his first album, man, his first song.
Yeah, I mean there wasn't an album yet. This was just singles.
Yeah, the single, which is crazy. It blows my mind that his first song, boom, hits the top 40. And it probably moved up there pretty quick. It probably stayed there for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly where 409 and Surfin' Safari went. I don't think I have that in front of me, but they had to be top 10 hits, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, these songs have lasted the test of time. You still hear them on the radio. Now, in 1962, Wilson and the Beach Boys signed a 7-year deal with Capitol Records.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
It's a big, that's a big deal. The Capitol I don't even think Capitol signed the Beatles to 7 years.
7 years, a long commitment.
Nope. So they were using producer Nick Vennett at the beginning there. That was the idea. They would use him. And during sessions for their debut album, which would be called Surfin' Safari, Brian Wilson negotiated with Capitol to record the band outside the label's basement studios, which he felt was ill-suited for the group. So he didn't want to work at Capitol Records.
Yeah.
He had built a studio in his basement, okay, and felt that was better to use. Now, at Wilson's insistence, Capitol permitted the Beach Boys to fund their own external sessions while retaining all rights to the recordings. That was rare, okay, that you would have the band be allowed to have control of all its recordings in return for paying for the sessions.
That's crazy.
Not too many people had that
kind
of deal, okay? So it also secured production control over the album, though Brian wouldn't get the credit, okay? Brian would not get the credit as a producer. He was involved with producing it. It would go to Nick Vennett. That was the deal.
Yeah, okay.
So now Brian was very, very, very inspired by Phil Spector. And you could hear that in all those early Beach Boys recordings, especially the Ronettes. He was in love with the Ronettes. So inspired by producer Phil Spector, whose work with the Teddy Bears he admired. That was Spector's first musical thing. He actually played in that band. Okay, has the song "To Know Him Is to Love Him." Okay, Brian Wilson sought to emulate Spector's career path. He wanted to be a producer like him. And he would reflect later on in life saying, "I've always felt I was a behind-the-scenes man rather than an entertainer." Collaborating with songwriter Gary Usher, he would compose numerous songs outside the Beach Boys. And also there was a band called Rachel and the Revolvers he was involved with, a song called Revolution that was written by Gary Usher, and it was released by Dot Records in September of that year. Interference from Brian Wilson's father eventually led to the dissolution of his partnership with Gary Usher. Seems like Murray Wilson was very hands-on, maybe a little controlling.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, by mid-1962, Brian Wilson was writing with disc jockey Roger Christian, whom he met but through his father and and Gary Usher, and with guitarist Bob Norberg, who later became his roommate. In October of 1962, Safari Records, a short-lived label founded by Murray Wilson, released the single "The Surfer Moon" by Bob and Sherry, and that was the first record to credit Brian as producer. It wasn't a Beach Boys song, but it was something he was involved with on an outside project. Both those songs were Humpty Dumpty was another song, and The Surfer Moon. Both of them were written by Brian.
So he's already writing and producing. He's
for other people, yeah. He's involved with all that now.
He's still doing the Beach Boys, right?
Right.
So happening at the same time.
Yep, all at the same time. The guy was busy probably 7 days a week. So from January to March of 1963, Wilson produced the Beach Boys' second album called Surfin U.S.A., and he limited his public appearances with the group to television gigs and local shows so he could prioritize all work in the studio. David Marks would substitute for him on vocals during other performances. This was starting to be like a pull away from actual performing and stuff that Brian would have problems with later on. In March, Capitol Records released Surfin U.S.A., the second album, and that was their first top 10. I'm sorry, they released a single, Surfin U.S.A., before the album, and that was their first top 10 single, actually. Okay, wow. So the accompanying album peaked at number 2 on Billboard, Surfin U.S.A., the album, by July, and that cemented the Beach Boys as a major commercial act. Now, against producer Vennett's wishes, Wilson collaborated with artists outside Capitol, including the Liberty Records duo Jan and Dean. Wilson co-wrote the song Surf City that Jan and Dean did, and he wrote that with Jan Berry, and that topped the U.S. charts in July of 1963, and that was his first composition to do so. So actually, all the songs he wrote didn't make it to number 1 until he wrote a song for Jan and Dean called Surf City.
That's pretty funny.
That is funny, right? So the song's success actually revitalized Jan and Dean's career. They had done some, they were known a little bit after this as a surf band. They really weren't before that. Capitol Records and Wilson's father disapproved of the collaboration. And Murray demanded his son cease working with Jan and Dean, though they continued to appear on each other's recordings. So already you're starting to see some problems with his father.
So the father's the one that's really the problems.
Yeah. And what do? Your father's the manager. How do you handle that? So
what's the funny thing about that? Back in the day, if you were with one record company, they frowned upon you going and helping another group somewhere else for another label. That wasn't something that
No, a record label wouldn't like that because you're making money for somebody else.
Somebody else, yeah.
And they felt they owned you.
Yeah.
So it was around this time that Brian Wilson began producing the Rovell Sisters. And this was a girl group consisting of sisters Marilyn and Diane Rovell and their cousin Ginger Blake, whom he met at a Beach Boys concert the previous August. Brian Wilson pitched the group to Capitol as the Honeys, he called them, a female counterpart to the Beach Boys. The company would release several Honeys recordings as singles, though they didn't sell that well. And he grew close to the Rovell family and resided primarily at their home through 1963 and 1964. The group's fourth single, He's a Doll, the Rovells, released in April of 1964, exemplified his attempts to become an entrepreneurial producer like Phil Spector. It was a big production, that song. Wilson was officially credited as the Beach Boys producer on their album Surfer Girl, which was recorded in June and July of 1963 and would be released in that September of that year. This LP reached number 7 on the national charts with similarly successful singles, and he also produced the car-themed album Little Deuce Coupe.
Wow.
And that was released just 3 weeks after Surfer Girl. So they got 2 albums out 3 weeks apart. Still resistant to touring, Al Jardine was his live substitute. Okay, so by late 1963, Mark's departure from the Beach Boys necessitated Brian to come back to the touring lineup. By the end of the year, Wilson had written, arranged, or produced 42 songs for other acts.
Wow.
Okay, so he was all over the place, not really enjoying touring, gave it to Al Jardine or others to do, Mark's, and then had to come back to record. He never really liked touring. And, in a way, my opinion is that kind of sucks for the fans because I think you wanted to see Brian Wilson live.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you if you were a fan and then he's not there?
He's not there, yeah.
Yeah.
They added something to that sounds just like him, still the Beach Boys, what I'm saying?
But he would do television appearances. So
Yeah.
if they went on Ed Sullivan or something, he would do it. So everybody would get a look at him and the band. But then when you went to see him, it wasn't him.
It wasn't him. That's funny.
That's kind of a gyp. I don't know. I would feel like gypped with that.
Technically, he probably had more producer credit because he probably also produced those singles that they were doing. Even though they worked with somebody, he probably set up everything in the singles, in the beginning of the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
He just didn't get credit.
Yeah. I mean, of course, he's on the records. He played the records at home,
Yeah.
So throughout the year 1964, Brian Wilson would tour internationally with the Beach Boys while writing and producing their albums Shutdown, Volume 2, which came out in March, All Summer Long, which came out in June, okay, and the Beach Boys Christmas album, which came out in November of that year.
Yeah, those are all good albums.
Yeah, especially the Christmas album.
Yeah.
That's a classic. Now, following a particularly stressful Australian and Asian tour in early of 1964, the group dismissed Murray as their manager. They got rid of their phone. Okay. Murray maintained occasional contact with Brian, offering unsolicited advice on the group's business decisions. And Brian also continued to solicit his father's opinions on musical matters. So they didn't stop talking, but just stopped dealing with each other on a business level.
You're no longer the manager.
Yeah. Now, a very concerning event would happen, concerning for Brian, in 1964. Now, that was the Beatles. Okay. In February of that year, they showed up on Ed Sullivan and took the whole world by storm. Beatlemania ran rampant through the country.
Yeah.
And he felt that the Beach Boys' supremacy on the charts, and they really were, okay, was threatened by this British invasion.
He was right.
That was, yeah. They would never have big hits again like that. Okay. So 1966, Brian would be quoted saying, "The Beatles invasion shook me up a lot. So we stepped up the gas a little bit on songs. And like the Beach Boys' May 1964 single, I Get Around, their first U.S. that was their first U.S. number one hit. Okay. That a Beach Boys song. Okay. And that was kind of I don't know if it doesn't sound like the Beatles or anything, but it's definitely like a little heavier than stuff that they had done. Not really like heavy guitar, but just more of a faster beat and stuff like that. So that was his
rock and roll.
It was his way of trying to respond to what the Beatles were doing. It was an unofficial rivalry. It wasn't anything like nasty or anything like that. Okay. And I think, from what I understand, I think the actual rivalry was really between like Paul McCartney and the Beach Boys. It really wasn't like the band. Okay. Maybe a couple of things were said. I'm not sure. Now, the B-side of I Get Around was Don't Worry, Baby, classic ballad. Okay. Yeah. And Brian Wilson has always said that's probably the greatest record he ever did, that song. Okay.
Wow.
Now, by late 1964, Brian Wilson faced a mounting psychological strain from a lot of the career pressures he was experiencing. He began distancing himself from the Beach Boys' surf-themed material, which had ceased following the All Summer Long track, Don't Back Down.
Yeah.
During the group's first major European tour, a reporter asked how he had felt about originating the surf music sound, to which he responded by saying he had aimed to produce a sound that teens dig and that can be applied to any theme. Exhausted by his self described Mr. Everything role, he later expressed feeling mentally drained and really unable to get any rest. Adding to his concerns were the group's business operations and the quality of their records, which he believed suffered from this arrangement. So he was getting disillusioned a little bit, it seems, by that time. December 23rd, 1964, Brian Wilson was to accompany his bandmates for a 2-week U.S. tour, but during a flight from L.A. to Houston, he experienced a mental breakdown, sobbing uncontrollably due to stress over his recent marriage to Marilyn Rovell. He married one of the Rovell sisters.
Yeah, you know what it is? That's probably also stress and freaking, and he's burned out. That's what more it is. He's burned
Yeah,
out.
and a constant need to try to do better and do better and do better. Do better than your last record. That's hard to do. That's very hard to do. Okay. Al Jardine would be recalled saying, none of us had ever witnessed something like that before, like a breakdown like that. So Wilson played the show in Houston later that day, but then was replaced by session musician Glenn Campbell.
Wow.
Yeah, the famous Glenn Campbell for the rest of the tour. Brian Wilson, speaking in 1966, described it as the first of 3 breakdowns he would have. When the group resumed recording their next album in January of 65, Wilson declared that he would be withdrawing from all future tours, and it would attribute his decision partly to a fucked up jealousy of Spector and the Beatles. Like he just felt, I don't know. I think he was just kind of losing it at that point.
Yeah, he probably was losing because you know what?
Yeah.
That's
and also, drug use had some influence.
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay. Glenn Campbell would continue substituting on that tour until February of 65. And then after which Wilson produced Glenn Campbell's solo single called Guess I'm Dumb. Now he did that kind of like just as a gesture of appreciation because he was helping the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And Columbia Records staff producer Bruce Johnston was subsequently hired as Wilson's permanent touring replacement. So Campbell was out and a guy named Bruce Johnston was in.
Took over.
With his bandmates frequently touring, Wilson grew socially distant from the Beach Boys. Right? They're on tour, he's at home. In late 1964, he had relocated to an apartment at 7235 Hollywood Boulevard, where he began cultivating a new social circle through music industry connections. Biographer Stephen Gaines writes that this period marked Wilson's first independence from family oversight. He was away from his brothers. He was away from his father. Okay. And it allowed him to befriend some different people. Now, he befriended talent agent Lauren Schwartz, whom he met at a Hollywood studio. Through Schwartz, Wilson engaged with literature on philosophy and world religions, sparking his interest in mystical topics. And Schwartz also introduced Wilson to marijuana and hashish, and his habitual use of these substances combined with his frequent visits to Schwartz's apartment contributed to marital tensions with his wife, Marilyn. His first song composed under the influence of marijuana was the song Please Let Me Wonder in 1965.
That's a good song.
Yeah, it is. I didn't know he did it when he was stoned.
Made me wonder.
Hey, sometimes it helps.
That all makes sense.
Now, throughout 1965, Brian Wilson's musical ambitions progressed significantly with the albums The Beach Boys Today, which came out in March, Summer Days and Summer Nights, which came out in June. And weeks after relocating to an apartment on West Hollywood's Gardner Street with his wife, Wilson took LSD for the first time with Lauren Schwartz.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so he's got a little hippie girlfriend that he's hanging out with, okay? And Wilson would later say of the experience, it just tore my head off. You just come to grips with what you are, what you can do and what you can't do, and you learn to face it. During the experience, he composed portions of the Beach Boys single California Girls. Okay, and I could see writing that on acid. Okay,
Yeah.
and he later described the session for the song's backing track, held on April 6th, as his favorite, and the opening orchestral section of that song as the greatest piece of music that he's ever written. However, he attributed persistent paranoia later that year to his LSD use, which happens when you start doing that a lot. Now, after unsuccessful efforts to distance Wilson from Schwartz, Marilyn temporarily separated from him. She later reflected on the strain caused by his drug associated social circle, stating he was not the same Brian. These people were very hurtful, and I tried to get that through to Brian. Okay, the couple would reconcile soon after, and in late 65 moved into a newly purchased home at 1448 Laurel Way in Beverly Hills. Now, it's around this time that we start getting into Pet Sounds, which I think is his, Brian the Beach Boys masterpiece. All right.
Yes.
And also the album Smile, which has a very controversial history. So Wilson recalled that after relocating to this Beverly Hills home, he experienced an unexpected surge of creativity, working for hours, developing new musical ideas. He was taking a lot of drugs at the time. Okay, a lot of pills he was getting into, and it screwed him up for a bit, he admits. But over 5 months, he planned an album that would elevate his music to a spiritual level. In December of 1965, Wilson enlisted jingle writer Tony Asher as his lyricist for the Beach Boys' next album, Pet Sounds, which came out in May of 66. He produced most of the album between January and April of 66 across multiple Hollywood studios, mainly employing his bandmates for singing vocal parts and session musicians for the backing tracks. Reflecting on the album, Wilson highlighted the instrumental Let's Go Away for a While as his most satisfying piece of music at the time. And the song I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, as a partially autobiographical song about a guy who was crying inside because he thought he was too advanced. In a 1995 interview, he recalled Caroline No, that song, probably the best song he's ever written. So he said that a few times about different songs. I mean, people like John Lennon would admit that Pet Sounds was a total influence for Sgt. Pepper.
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah,
definitely. You can hear it right away when you listen to it.
And then at the same time, Brian Wilson would say Revolver was my influence for Pet Sounds. So these guys were listening to each other very closely, even though there was a rivalry sort of.
Yeah,
they were paying attention. Okay, so Wilson met Derek Taylor, the Beatles' former press officer who became the Beach Boys' publicist in 1966. At Wilson's reputation and it was at Wilson's request, Taylor launched a media campaign to elevate his public image, promoting him as a genius. That's when you started to hear things about Brian Wilson as a musical genius. Taylor's reputation and outreach bolstered the album Pet Sounds' critical success in the UK. However, Wilson later expressed resentment toward the Genius label, which he felt heightened unrealistic expectations for his work. I think it added to his pressure.
Yeah, but he was a genius. He did write a lot of stuff,
Well, he did, and I think he was a genius. But I think to go out and try to promote yourself that way, and then it kind of sticks, and now you got to live with it. That's like that kind of sucks. So and it was also at this time that Carl Wilson, his brother, and Mike Love grew frustrated with this increasing coverage of just Brian. All right, Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds was top 10. Okay, the album was a top 10 album, and they were very responsible for it as much as Brian. As for the harmonies and everything like that, they felt a little discredited. So through late 1966, Brian Wilson worked extensively on the Beach Boys' single "Good Vibrations," which topped the U.S. charts in December, and began collaborating with session musician Van Dyke Parks on "Smile," which was the planned follow-up to Pet Sounds. Brian Wilson touted "Smile" as a teenage symphony to God, and his expanding circle increasingly influenced his business and creative affairs. Parks would say that eventually it wasn't just Brian and me in a room. It was Brian and me and all kinds of self-interested people pulling him in various directions. Not a good working environment.
No.
Television producer David Oppenheim, who visited Brian Wilson's home while filming the 1967 documentary Inside Pop: The Rock Revolution, characterized the attended scenes as a playpen of irresponsible people. Okay, I think this was the time when you started hearing about crazy behavior at
Yeah.
Wilson, like, tripping on acid and sitting in a sandbox and, like naked, stuff like that,
The guy was doing so much stuff, which he definitely, like, he probably loved to get high and shit, but he was burned out sometimes because he worked he was like constantly working. He took on too many things,
Yeah, he
He
did.
was working on too many projects at one time,
Now, beginning in 1966, late 66, 67, it would be a period of decline for him going into the 70s. Smile was never finished, okay? And that was due in large part to Brian Wilson's worsening mental condition and physical exhaustion. Late 1966, he started having erratic behavior. During the sessions for the track Fire, or it was also called Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, he started, during the recording of Smile, really being erratic. In April of 67, Wilson and his wife relocated to a newly purchased mansion on 10452 Bellagio Road in Bel Air. There, Wilson began constructing another personal home studio. By this time, most of his recent associates had departed or been excluded from his life. So people were just leaving him.
Yeah.
He was fucked up. Okay. So in May, Derek Taylor announced that Smile had been scrapped. Okay. And Wilson explained in a 68 interview, "We pulled out because I was about ready to die. I was trying too hard, so hard. So all of a sudden, I decided not to try anymore." That July, the Beach Boys released Heroes and Villains as a single, one of my favorite Beach Boys songs. And it had a mixed critical and commercial reception. And that kind of strained Wilson's morale a little bit, contributing more to his psychological and physical decline. He later acknowledged that upholding his industry reputation as a genius was a really big thing for me, and that he had grown weary of demands to produce great orchestral stuff all the time. Okay, so he's feeling that pressure.
Yeah, definitely.
Combined with, increasing drug use and things like that. Now, beginning with Smiley Smile in September of 1967, the band shifted recording operations to Wilson's studio, where they worked intermittently until 1972. The album marked the first time production was credited to the group collectively instead of Wilson alone. Yeah. Producer Terry Melcher of the famous Paul Revere and the Raiders. He was Doris Day's son. Okay. Worked with the Byrds. Okay. Was involved with the Charles Manson shit that went on. Okay. That was his house. That was his house that he had lived in that house before Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski lived in the house that got
wow.
Yeah. Now, producer, well, there is the famous Beach Boys connection with the Manson stuff. I'm not going to get into that here because it's not really about Brian. But, Brian supposedly did meet Charles Manson. So.
Oh, I think they all met him, right?
Yeah,
Was he his brother or something?
Yeah. Now, producer Terry Melcher attributed this change to Wilson's reluctance to risk individual scrutiny, saying he no longer wanted to put his stamp on records. In August 67, Wilson briefly rejoined the band for 2 live performances in Honolulu and recorded for an unfinished live album entitled Laid in Hawaii. Lay like the flowers.
The flowers. It's still funny.
Yeah. During sessions for Wild Honey, that album, in December of 1967, Wilson encouraged his brother Carl to contribute more to the record-making process. He also began producing tracks for Danny Hutton's group Redwood, recording 3 songs, including Time to Get Alone and Darling. But the project was halted by Carl and Mike Love, who urged periods of emotional recovery for Wilson. They told him to take it easy.
Yeah,
Now,
'cause
while the album featured increased contributions from other members, Wilson remained central, even on tracks he did not write. He later described Friends, okay, as his second solo album, really, kind of like after Pet Sounds, and his favorite Beach Boys album. He's saying it was really all him on that.
yeah,
Now, I mentioned Redwood, right? Danny Hutton's group. Do you remember
yeah.
who they would turn into? They changed their name.
Who did it turn into?
Three Dog Night.
Three Dog Night. Yeah, well, we talked about
We
that.
did a show on them not a few months ago.
Yeah, it's so funny how all these shows link one way or another.
Yep, yep. It all spider webs together.
Yeah, it's
You know,
funny.
the music industry really isn't all that big.
Nah.
You think it is, but it's not. Now, for the remainder of 1968, Wilson's songwriting output declined substantially, okay, as did more of his emotional state, leading him to self-medicate with overconsumptions of food, alcohol, and drugs. As the Beach Boys faced impending financial collapse, they weren't doing well financially.
No,
He began to supplement his regular amphetamines and marijuana with cocaine, to which Hutton had introduced him. Hutton later stated that Wilson expressed suicidal tendencies during this period, describing it as the onset of his Wilson's real decline. In mid-1968, Brian was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Some say it was voluntarily. It's really not known.
Nobody really knows.
Now, his hospitalization was kept private from the media at the time, and his bandmates proceeded with recording sessions for the album 2020, which came out in February of 1969. Once discharged later in the year, Wilson rarely finished any tracks for the band, leaving much of his subsequent output for Carl Wilson to complete. Journalist Nick Cohn wrote in 1968 that Wilson had become the subject of rumors describing him as increasingly withdrawn, very brooding, and almost like a hermit, with occasional sightings of him in the back of a limousine or cruising around Hollywood, bleary, unshaven, huddled, kind of huddled down, like just wasn't looking good. People would just catch glimpses of him here and there. Wilson typically stayed secluded upstairs while the group recorded below, joining sessions only to suggest revisions to music he had overheard from upstairs. Okay.
Yeah.
He occasionally emerged from his bedroom to preview new songs for the group. Terry Melcher likened these appearances to Aesop delivering a new fable in the like, coming down from up high to Journalist Brian Chidester later coined the term the bedroom tapes to refer to Wilson's unreleased output between 1968 and 1975, most of which remains unheard of publicly. A lot of that stuff's never been released.
Wow.
According to Mike,
maybe
it'll come out. Yeah, you never know. According to Mike Love, Wilson had lost interest in the mechanical aspect of recording, deferring technical work to Carl Wilson. Band engineer Stephen Desper said that Brian remained indirectly involved with the group's productions through Carl, and that Brian's reduced contributions stemmed from limited hours in the day, as well as his aversion to the confrontation. So Brian doesn't like to hurt anyone's feelings. He continued. So if someone's working on something else, he wasn't going to jump in there and say, look, this is my production in my house, so get out of here. He didn't do that. Okay. So, Marilyn would recall that her husband withdrew because of perceived resentment from the group. Okay. He felt they didn't like him.
Yeah.
They didn't like him anymore. They didn't want to deal with him. So he kind of was like, okay, you assholes, you think you could do as good as me or whatever? Go ahead. You do it. You think it's easy. You do it.
And it wasn't. It was hard.
It wasn't. And yeah, I mean, it's not easy. So early in 1969, the Beach Boys commenced recording Sunflower, which came out in August of 1970. Wilson contributed numerous songs, though most were excluded from the final track selection. Okay. He co-wrote and produced the single Breakaway with his father in early 1969, after which he largely withdrew from studio work until August of that year. The group faced difficulties securing a new record deal, attributed by gains to Wilson's diminished standing in the industry. In May of 1969, Wilson disclosed the band's near bankruptcy to reporters, which derailed negotiations with the label Deutsche Grammophon and nearly jeopardized their upcoming European tour. That July, he opened a short-lived health food store called the Radiant Radish with his cousin Stephen Korthoff and an associate named Arnie Geller. In August, the Beach Boys publishing company Sea of Tunes sold their song catalog to Irving Almo Music for $700,000. Okay, that actually equates to $6 million now.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. Now Wilson signed the consent form under pressure from his father. So basically, his father pressured him to sell the rights to all the music before.
I guess they needed money, you know.
He stated that the sale of it kind of destroyed him. Okay, he didn't talk for days afterwards. He took it almost like his father didn't believe in him anymore. Okay, emotionally he was a wreck. Okay,
Yeah.
And it was during this period that he started kind of almost being suicidal. Actually, I guess you could say he was, because he tried driving off a cliff.
Oh shit.
Okay, yeah, and then he wanted to drive off a cliff and be buried in a backyard grave he already dug.
He's losing it.
Yeah, so he actually would channel some of those feelings into a song called "Till I Die," later calling the song a summation of everything he had to say at that time. Later in 1969, Wilson produced poet Stephen Kalinich's spoken word album called "A World of Peace Must Come." That November, the Beach Boys signed to Reprise Records, which was a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. Now, you know who ran Reprise Records? Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, and that was one of his, rock acts, pop acts that he had.
Yeah.
He would have quite a few. He would have like T-Rex would have their American stuff released on Reprise. Other bands would be on there too. Basically, there was contractual terms while he was on Reprise, and that was it required Brian Wilson's active participation in their albums. He couldn't just not be present.
Yeah, he had to be present.
So in March of 1970, Wilson briefly substituted for Mike Love on a tour. And in April, he attempted to produce a country album for co-manager Fred Vale, later known as Cows in the Pasture. I think it was not totally produced by him. I think it was partially produced by him. Yeah.
Here we go. He's still working.
Yeah, no, he's working. There's nothing going to stop him, but he had, with the Beach Boys, he had to be involved at this point contractually.
Had to.
Yeah. Now, Wilson's disappointment over the poor commercial reception of the album Sunflower led him to reduce his contributions to subsequent Beach Boys recordings. Bruce Johnston described his involvement in the Surf's Up sessions of August of 71 as that of a visitor. In November of 1970, Wilson performed with the band at the Whiskey A Go-Go for 1.5 dates. Intense discomfort forced him to leave mid-performance during the second show. And following his experience, he told Melody Maker magazine that although he was quite happy living at home, he felt less creative and less engaged with the band. He described himself as kind of a dropout. In September of 71, Wilson told a reporter he had recently returned to arranging rather than writing. In December, at a Long Beach concert, manager Jack Riley persuaded Wilson to perform with the Beach Boys, though his appearance only lasted a few minutes. From late of 71 to early 72, Wilson and musician David Sandler collaborated on the album Spring, which was the first album by Marilyn Wilson and Diane Rovell's new group, American Spring. So, interestingly, Marilyn Dovell went back with her sister Diane, to start this new group called American Spring. As with much of his work in this period, the extent of the contributions varied, but it was his most involved production effort since Friends in 1968. During the recording of Carl and the Passions in April of 1972, that was Carl Wilson, Wilson rarely left his bedroom, though Blondie Chaplin later would recall. Blondie Chaplin was a musician that played with the Beach Boys for many, many years.
Yeah,
played with the Stones too, other people. Now, when he came down, his contribution was amazing. Wilson's unavailability was such that his image had to be superimposed into the group portrait on the record sleeve. He didn't even show up for the cover picture.
That's pretty funny.
During the summer of '72, Brian Wilson joined his bandmates when they temporarily relocated to Holland after persistent persuasion, residing in a Dutch house known as Flowers. Repeatedly listening to Randy Newman's album Sail Away, he was inspired to write the fairy tale Mount Vernon and the Fairway, drawing on memories of listening to the radio at Mike Love's family home in his youth. The group declined to include the fairy tale on their next album called Holland in January of '73, and instead released it as a bonus EP packaged with the album. That April, Wilson briefly joined his bandmates on stage during an encore at the Hollywood Palladium. It was in June of '73 that his father, Murray, would pass away. All right. And Wilson, he then would seclude himself in the chauffeur's quarters of his home, where he spent his time sleeping, doing drugs and drinking, overeating. Okay. He was starting to gain weight and basically being self-destructive.
Yeah.
He rarely ventured outside wearing anything but pajamas, and later said that his father's death had a lot to do with my retreating. Wilson's family were eventually forced to take control of his financial affairs due to his irresponsible drug expenditure.
Oh, he was doing everything.
Yeah. This led Wilson to occasionally wander the city, begging for rides, drugs, and alcohol. That's how fucked up he was. Okay. Now, according to Brian Wilson, from 1974 to '75, his output was confined to minimal fragmentary recordings due to a diminished capacity for sustained concentration. He would be snorting cocaine all day. He would be reading magazines like Playboy and Penthouse all day, and hanging out with Danny Hutton, whose Laurel Canyon house had become the center of Wilson's social life and everybody's drug use. Okay.
Fancy drug
at Hutton's house, anybody from John Lennon to Ringo Starr to Keith Moon to Alice Cooper to Iggy Pop would show up. Okay, so you know what was going on there.
Oh, yeah.
Now, on several occasions, Marilyn Wilson sent her friends to climb Hutton's fence and retrieve her husband. In '74, Wilson interrupted a set by jazz musician Larry Coryell at the Troubadour by leaping on stage and singing Bebop Lula while wearing slippers and a bathrobe. God. It's not funny what it is. Jeez.
It's fucked up, man.
It's fucked up. So many reported anecdotes would be happening at this time involving Wilson in the early '70s. Okay. He would John Sebastian, famous songwriter, he wrote the song "Welcome Back, Kotter," and John Sebastian. Okay,
yeah.
He would recall that Brian Wilson would just show up at his house, unannounced. Okay, and be fucked up.
Be fucked up.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the Beach Boys' greatest hits compilation called "Endless Summer" was a surprise success when it came out in October of '74. It was the second #1 U.S. album in that year for them. And to take advantage of their sudden resurgence in popularity, Wilson agreed to join his bandmates in Colorado for the recording of a new album at James William Guercio's Caribou Ranch studio. The group completed a few tracks, including Child of Winter, which was a Christmas song, but ultimately abandoned the project. Released as a single at the end of '74, Child of Winter was their first record that displayed the credit produced by Brian Wilson. And that was the first one since 1966 with that credit.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So even though he was doing it, he wasn't always credited. And then he wasn't always doing it either. Okay. Early in '75, while still under contract with Reprise and Warner Brothers, Wilson signed a short-lived sideline production deal with Bruce Johnson and Terry Melch's Equinox Records. Together, they founded the loose-knit supergroup known as California Music, which also involved Gary Usher, Kurt Butcher, and other LA musicians, along with his guest appearances on Johnny Rivers' rendition of Help Me Rhonda and Jackie DeShannon's Boat to Sail. Wilson's production of California music's single Why Do Fools Fall in Love represents his only serious work throughout this period. Now, Wilson's increased consumption of food, cigarettes, alcohol, other drugs, and he was starting to get into heroin, strained his marriage to Marilyn, who threatened divorce or to institutionalize him.
Yeah.
His weight reached 240 pounds. In 1975, to address his declining health, band manager Stephen Love appointed his brother Stan, a professional basketball player, as Wilson's bodyguard, trainer, and caretaker. So this family intervention involved lawyers and family members and accountants and all these people to kind of remind him of what his contractual obligations were and what his band meant to people and to each other. Okay, so it would kind of take hold. Okay, and his health would improve over the few months after that. Okay, he would enter into a therapy, seeing psychologist Eugene Landy. It was like a 24-hour psychological therapy program. He started it in October of 75. And it was under Landy's care that Wilson became stabilized and became more socially engaged, renewing his creativity and productivity. In 76, the slogan, Brian's Back, was widely used to promote the Beach Boys concert tours and the July release of 15 Big Ones, the first album since Pet Sounds to list Wilson as the sole producer.
Wow.
Recording sessions were tense as his bandmates opposed his proposal for a covers album and questioned his readiness to lead studio proceedings. The album ultimately featured a mix of covers and original material. Beginning on July 2nd, 1976, Wilson resumed regular performances with the band for the first time since 1964, singing and alternating between bass guitar and piano.
So he's like back for a bit.
He's back. Okay. In August, he toured outside California for the first time since 1970. He was giving interviews. He was on. There was a television special that producer Lorne Michaels would do for them. Okay, on NBC, and the promotional success of the Brian's Back title was kind of controversial because Wilson's remarks and interviews implied he had not fully recovered, from his addictions. And in one interview, he said he kind of felt like a prisoner. So people were kind of like, well, he's not totally back, but he's back.
But he's back.
Yeah, but he's back. So from October of 76 to January of 77, Wilson produced a collection of recordings largely on his own, while his bandmates pursued other creative and personal endeavors. Released in April of 77, The Beach Boys' Love You was the band's first album to feature Wilson as the primary composer since the album Wild Honey in 1967. Originally titled Brian Loves You, the album showcased Wilson playing nearly every instrument. Band engineer Earl Mankey described it as Wilson's effort to create a serious autobiographical work. In a 1998 interview, Wilson listed 15 Big Ones and Love You as his two favorite Beach Boys albums. So he's always saying something is his favorite, but he's got a lot of them.
That was definitely his,
Yeah, he played
every album that came out. What's his favorite?
He played all the instruments on that one. At the end of 76, Wilson's family and management dismissed the psychologist Landy after he raised his monthly fee to $20,000 a month. Okay, jeez. So shortly afterwards, Wilson told the journalist he considered the treatment successful. Landy's role was immediately assumed by his cousins, Brian's cousins, Steve Kordoff and Stan Love, a professional model, Rocky Pamplin, and was a college friend of Stan. Under their supervision, Wilson maintained a healthy, drug-free lifestyle for several months.
Wow.
In early 1977, Wilson produced Adult/Child, intended as the follow-up to Love You, but some bandmates voiced concerns about the work, leading to it not being released. In March, the Beach Boys signed with CBS Records, whose contract required Wilson to compose most of the material for all subsequent albums. According to Gaines, Wilson was distraught at that project. Okay, that the idea of that. Okay, now in reference to the sessions for the MIU album in October of '78, Wilson described experience like a mental blank out.
Wow.
He couldn't come up with anything.
He was going.
He was credited as the album's executive producer. Stan noted that Wilson was depressed and reluctant to write with Mike Love, though Mike persisted. Okay, and around this time, Wilson attempted to produce an album for Pamplin. Okay, that would have featured the Honeys as backing vocalists. Rocky Pamplin being a college friend of theirs. So
let me get this right. He can produce for the Beach Boys, but he's producing for everybody else.
Yeah.
It's freaking crazy.
Yeah, he's basically having a problem working with them.
Yeah.
It's sad. I think there's, I can't imagine he was feeling pressure, I guess, to come up with things that he couldn't do it. He was blank. He was drawing blank. Yeah.
Every time I make a masterpiece, I want me to bring another one.
Yeah. Now, in 1978, the Beach Boys had a disastrous Australian tour that did not go well. Okay. Brian Wilson had regressed. He retreated back into drugs again, using cocaine and barbiturates. He overdosed in 1978. He hitchhiked in West Hollywood after this overdose and eventually arrived at a gay bar where he played piano for drinks. Okay, he just walked into the bar and played piano. A bar patron then drove him to Mexico, after which he hitchhiked back to San Diego. Days later, police found him in Balboa Park. No shoes, no money, no wallet, and he was taken to Alvarado Hospital to detox from severe alcohol poisoning.
Wow.
Bad shape. Wilson rejoined his bandmates for the recording of L.A., which stands for Light Album, March of 1979. But after producing demos and early recordings, he asked that Bruce Johnston take over the project. It was at this point that his marriage was starting to unravel. Wilson left his mansion in Beverly Hills for a modest home on Sunset Boulevard, where his alcoholism did get worse. After attacking his doctor, he was institutionalized at Bronxman Memorial Hospital, initially admitted in November '78 for 3 months, discharged for 1 month, then readmitted again. Wow. In January of '79, while hospitalized, his caregivers, Stan Love and Rocky Pamplin, were fired. Wilson was released in March. He rented a house in Santa Monica and was cared for by a round-the-clock psychiatric nursing team. Later, he purchased a home in the Pacific Palisades, although his bandmates urged him to produce their next album called Keeping the Summer Alive in March of 1980. He was unable and basically unwilling to do so. Wilson continued overeating, doing drugs. To motivate Wilson in his musical endeavors, Dennis Wilson occasionally provided him with McDonald's, hamburgers, and cocaine. God, just what he needed. So wow. John Stebbins' biography of Dennis Wilson described these secret recording sessions between the brothers, which were hidden due to efforts by certain members of the Beach Boys clan to keep the two of them apart.
Yeah.
Discovering their collaboration often led to a halt in the home studio of musicologists and often led them to the halt in the home studio proceedings that were going on, okay? Bootleg tapes of the brothers' collaborations produced in 80 and 81 at the Venice Beach home studio of musicologist and film executive Garby Leon later became known among fans as the cocaine sessions or the hamburger sessions. Jesus.
Oh, it's pretty bad.
Excuse me. Excuse me there. In early of 1981, Pamplin and Stan Love were convicted of assaulting Dennis Wilson after learning he had been providing Wilson drugs.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. In early of 1982, Wilson signed a trust document granting Carl control of his finances and voting power in the band's corporate structure, and he was involuntarily admitted for a 3-day stay at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica.
Wow.
By the end of that year, he had blown up to 340 pounds.
Oh, shit.
Terrible. In 1982, after Wilson overdosed on alcohol, cocaine, and other drugs, his family and management staged an elaborate ruse to persuade him to re-enter the psychologist Landy's program. On November 5th, the group falsely informed Brian that he was destitute and no longer a Beach Boy, insisting he re-enlist Landy as his caretaker to continue receiving his touring income. Landy agreed to resume treatment only if granted complete control over Wilson's affairs and promised rehabilitation within 2 years. Wilson acquiesced and was taken to Hawaii, where he was isolated from friends and family and placed on a strict diet and health regimen. Combined with counseling sessions that retaught him basic social etiquette, the treatment restored his physical health. By March of 1983, he had returned to L.A. and was moved under Landy's direction to a Malibu home where he lived with several of Landy's aides and was cut off from many of his own friends and family. Between 1983 and 1986, Landy charged approximately $430,000 annually. When he was requested additional funds, Carl Wilson was obliged to allocate a quarter of Brian's publishing royalties.
Wow.
Landy gradually assumed the role of Wilson's creative and financial partner, eventually representing him at Brothers Records corporate meetings. This is his therapist.
Yeah, that's crazy.
He's a psychologist, okay?
Crazy.
Landy was accused of creating a Svengali-like environment by controlling every aspect of Wilson's life. I remember hearing about this in the news in 40 years ago. So he basically took control of Brian's life.
Yeah.
And his money and control of his career.
I think that's what his dad did too. His dad was like that.
Now, Brian would kind of counter these claims, stating, "People say that Dr. Landy runs my life, but the truth is I'm in charge." He later claimed that in mid-1985, he attempted suicide by swimming as far out to sea as possible before one of Landy's aides retrieved him. Sad. As Wilson's recovery consolidated, he participated in recording the album self-titled The Beach Boys, June 1985, a release touted as his comeback. He then curtailed regular collaborations with the band to pursue a solo career under Landy's guidance. And in 1986, he worked with former collaborator Gary Usher at Usher Studio, producing roughly about a dozen songs, most unreleased, with one track, Let's Go to Heaven in My Car, appearing on the Police Academy 3 1986 soundtrack. The body of work became known as the Wilson Project. Now, the next period would kind of be known as the Sweet Insanity period, okay? Wilson occasionally rejoined his bandmates on stage and performed his first ever solo gig at several charity concerts around Los Angeles. In January of 1987, he accepted a solo contract from Sire Records with President Seymour Stein, who mandated co-production by multi-instrumentalist Andy Paley of the Paley Brothers to keep Wilson focused. In return, Landy was allowed to serve as executive producer. So Landy's right in there. Okay. Yeah. Other producers, including Russ Titleman and Lenny Warnaker, soon joined the project, and conflicts with Landy would emerge. Released in July of '88, Brian Wilson, the self-titled album, received favorable reviews and decent sales, peaking at number 52 in the U.S. The album featured Rio Grande, an 8-minute Western suite reminiscent of songs from the album Smile that was never released. Its release was largely overshadowed by the controversy surrounding Landy and the success of the Beach Boys by themselves without Brian hit Kokomo from the Cocktail soundtrack.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was Kokomo was their first number one hit since Good Vibrations.
Wow.
And it was the first without Brian Wilson's involvement at all. So Brian's doing his own thing.
Yeah, and they're doing their own thing.
It's doing okay, but it's overshadowed by this ridiculous therapist that's controlling his life. Okay. And then the Beach Boys got their first #1 without Brian Wilson.
That's crazy.
Now, Kokomo is, I can't stand it.
Everywhere.
Yeah, I can't stand that song. That's like, I hate that song.
But that song was everywhere.
But that song was huge in that year. You could not get away from it.
Oh no, it was on every radio. Everybody was playing it.
Because that film was huge. Cocktail
Yeah.
with Tom Cruise. That was a huge film.
Yeah.
In 1989, Wilson and Landy formed the company Brains and Genius. By then, Landy was no longer legally recognized as Wilson's therapist and had surrendered his California psychology license. Together, they worked on Wilson's second album called Sweet Insanity, with Landy co-writing nearly all the material. Sire rejected the album due to Landy's lyrics and the inclusion of a rap song called Smart Girls. Wilson was going to rap. Okay, so in May, I mean, what is this? In May of 1989, Brian Wilson recorded "Daddy's Little Girl" for the film "She's Out of Control," and in June he was among the featured guests on the charity single "The Spirit of the Forest." I don't remember that one. Do you?
Yeah.
It's like a We Are the World type thing.
Yeah.
I don't remember "The Spirit of the Forest." There was so many in 88.
Yeah, they all came out.
Yeah, all those charity albums. In October of 1991, Wilson published his first memoir called Wouldn't It Be Nice? My Own Story. Biographer Peter Ames Carlin noted that the book plagiarized excerpts from earlier biographies and ranged from harsh criticisms of his own bandmates to passages resembling what looked like legal depositions. The memoir prompted defamation suits from Mike Love, Al Jardine, Carl Wilson, his own brother, and his mother, Audrey Wilson, filed a defamation suit. After a conservatorship suit filed by his family in May 1991, Wilson and Landy's partnership was dissolved in December, followed by a restraining order. So they were in court constantly trying to get Landy away from Brian. All right, and they finally succeeded with that. All right, and they got control, I think.
Yeah,
I think that's how that worked. Now, between the periods of 1992 and 2011, that would be a career resurgence. He would have some solo tours, okay, but it wasn't without controversy. He had tried to, he filed a $100 million suit against Irving Music to reclaim the publishing rights that his father had convinced to give him years earlier. He did not regain the rights for it, but he did get $10 million out of court settlement with that. He was sued by Mike Love for royalties that Love felt were held back, okay, and songwriting credits on certain things. They would it's 1994. A court would rule in favor of Love, okay, and award him $5 million and a share of future royalties from Brian Wilson. In September 1995, Wilson sued his former conservator Jerome Billett, seeking $10 million for alleged failures in supervising the lawyers handling the Irving Music and Love lawsuits. So even he was being helped in his conservatorship, and people were still doing the wrong thing. Now, according to his second wife, he would marry a woman named Melinda in 1995. Wilson was then entangled in 9 separate lawsuits. Many would be unresolved into the early 2000s.
Wow.
In 93, he agreed to record an album of songs by Van Dyke Parks, who he had worked with before, which was credited to the duo and released as Orange Crate Art in October of 95. In the late 1990s, Brian Wilson and Tony Asher rekindled their writing partnership, and one of their songs, Everything I Need, appeared on the Wilsons album, which was Carney and Wendy. Remember them?
Yeah.
Okay, and that included a few Brian Wilson penned songs for his kids. Okay. Now, although some recordings with the Beach Boys were completed, the Brian Wilson Andy Paley project was eventually abandoned. I always liked Andy Paley. Paley was part of the Paley brothers, and he was on Sire, and they had some cool power pop stuff, and I thought that would have been a good thing, but it didn't work out with him. Instead, Brian Wilson co-produced the band's 1966 album Stars and Stripes, Volume 1, with Joe Thomas, owner of River North Records. In 97, Wilson relocated to St. Charles, Illinois. He's out of California, okay, to work on a solo project with Joe Thomas. His third solo album, Imagination, in 1998, which he described as really a Brian Wilson, Joe Thomas album, peaked at number 88 in the U.S. and received criticism for its homogenized radio pop sound. Shortly before the album's release, Wilson lost his brother Carl and their mother Audrey.
Wow.
Yeah. Some reports from this period suggested that Wilson was exploited by those close to him, including his wife, Melinda. His daughter, Carney, nicknamed Melinda Melandi, okay? And while family friend Ginger Blake described Wilson as complacent and basically surrendered, Mike Love stated his willingness to reunite the Beach Boys with Wilson, but remarked that Brian usually has someone in his life who tells him what to do.
Yeah.
And now that person kind of wants to keep him away from us. I don't know why. You'd have to ask her, I guess. And then when asked if he still considered himself a Beach Boy, Brian Wilson responded, no, maybe a little bit. Debate persisted among fans over whether Wilson fully consented to his semi-regular touring schedule through the 2010s even, okay?
Right.
Yeah, now there would be, through the 2000s, some live albums, live at the Roxy Theater. There was a tribute show held in his honor at Radio City Music Hall. He would actually perform in March of 2001 at this tribute show. He would perform Heroes and Villains publicly for the first time in decades. There was a resurgence a bit of his music at this time. He was willing to go out and with an orchestra. And he was performing Pet Sounds in its entirety, okay, which I regret never seeing. I really should have. I remember the tickets being a little high, but you were getting appearances in 2004 with people like Paul McCartney popping up on stage.
Wow.
Eric Clapton, Elton John, okay. Some of the songs that were played on the Pet Sounds orchestral tour were from the unreleased album Smile, okay, and they would actually release this album eventually in time too, as kind of like to see where it was when it was. I've heard Smile, you can hear it even though it's unfinished, okay. Now in October of 2005, Arista released an album called What I Really Want for Christmas, which featured two originals by Brian Wilson. To celebrate the 40th anniversary of Pet Sounds, he toured the album briefly in November of 2006 with Al Jardine. And then in 2007, the South Bank Center in London commissioned Wilson to create a new song cycle in the style of Smile. Collaborating with Scott Bennett, Wilson reconfigured a collection of recently written songs into That Lucky Old Son, which was a semi-autobiographical conceptual piece about California. A studio-recorded version of the work was released as his seventh solo album in September 2008 and received generally favorable reviews. He was basically going back on his old material, reworking it with some new songs, and coming up with these orchestral things. It was pretty interesting, very creative, I thought, what he was doing. And then in 2009, he was approached by Walt Disney Records to record a Disney Songs album. And he agreed only if he could also record an album of George Gershwin songs. The Gershwin project, Brian Wilson Reimagines Gershwin, was released in August 2010, coming to number 26 on the Billboard 200. And it peaked at number 83. It reached in August of 2010, reaching number 26 on the Billboard Top 200, and it got to number 83 in the U.S. This release was soon overshadowed by the Smile sessions, which were issued 1 week later. So Smile would come out.
So he took out by himself.
Yep. So in mid 2011, Brian Wilson reunited with Mike Love, Al Jardine, David Marks, and Bruce Johnston to re-record "Do It Again" in secret for a potential 50th anniversary album.
Wow.
Rumors soon circulated in the music press about a world tour by the group. In a September report, Wilson said he was not participating in the tour with his bandmates, remarking, "I don't really like working with the guys, but it all depends on how we feel and how much money's involved. Money's not the only reason I make records, okay? But he says it does hold a place in our lives." Ultimately, Brian Wilson agreed to the tour, which lasted only till September of 2012, and to record the album "That's Why God Made the Radio." I remember when that came out.
Yeah,
By that time, Brian Wilson had renewed his creative partnership with Joe Thomas. Although Wilson was listed as the album's producer, Thomas was credited with recording and Love as the executive producer. In 2013, June of that year, Wilson's website announced that he was recording and self-producing new material with producer Don Was, Al Jardine, David Marks, Blondie Chaplin, and also Jeff Beck.
wow.
It stated that the material might be split into 3 albums, one of new pop songs, another of mostly instrumental tracks with Beck, and another of interwoven tracks dubbed The Suite, which initially began from the closing 4 tracks of "That's Why God Made the Radio." In January 2014, Wilson declared in an interview that the Beck collaborations would not be released. Okay, in September of 2014, Wilson attended the premiere of Bill Pollad's biopic Love and Mercy at the Toronto International Film Festival. He had contributed the song "One Kind of Love" to the film, which later received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Original Song. In October, BBC released a re-recorded version of "God Only Knows," featuring Wilson, Brian May from Queen, Elton John, Jake Bugg, Stevie Wonder, Lorde, and others to commemorate the launch of BBC Music. A week later, he was featured as a guest vocalist on Emile Haney's single "Falling Apart." His cover of Paul McCartney's "Wanderlust" was included on the tribute album "The Art of McCartney" that came out in November of that year, 2014. 2015, he'd see the release of "No Peer Pressure," another album of his with Joe Thomas. Okay, that got to number 30 in the U.S.
That's not bad, man.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing well. I mean, this stuff was getting some press. I do remember it.
Yeah.
Pet Sounds World Tours. Okay, in March of 2016, Wilson and Al Jardine began the Pet Sounds 50th Anniversary World Tour, billed as his final performances of the album. In October, his second memoir called "I Am Brian Wilson," written by journalist Ben Greenman, after several months of interviews, was published. Asked about negative remarks in Wilson's book, Love refuted that his printed statements were spoken and argued that Wilson was not in charge of his life, like I am mine, adding that he preferred to avoid pressuring Wilson because "I know he has a lot of issues." In the late 2010s, Wilson remarked to a journalist that he had not had a friend to talk to in 3 years.
Wow.
In a 2016 Rolling Stone interview, he responded to a retirement question by stating he would rather continue touring than sitting idle. So in 2019, Wilson embarked on a co-headlining tour with the Zombies, the British Invasion Band, performing selections from Friends and Surf's Up. Around this time, he had 2 back surgeries that left him reliant on a walker. Later in the year, he postponed some concert dates due to worsening mental health. The next month, his social media declared that he had recovered and would resume touring. Pausing his tours due to the COVID-19 pandemic, he resumed touring in August of 21. And in November, 2 releases followed, one called "At My Piano," which featured new instrumental piano recordings of his songs, and the soundtrack to Brian Wilson, The Long Promised Road, which included both new and previously unreleased recordings. At the end of 2021, he sold his publishing rights to Universal Music Publishing Group for $50 million. Wow. And Wilson was paid almost $32 million for his songwriter share, plus $19 million for his reversion rights, which was his ability to reclaim his song rights within a time period after signing them away under the Copyright Act of 1976. In 2022, his ex-wife, Marilyn, who had been rewarded half of his songwriting royalties, sued Brian for an additional $6.7 million.
Jesus Christ.
On July 26, 2022, Wilson played his final concert as a part of a joint tour with Chicago, the band Chicago, at the Pine Knob Music Theater in Clarkston, Michigan, where he was reported to have sat rigid and expressionless. I remember hearing about this. I think I saw some pictures. It was very sad. He really is like a shell of himself, you know.
Yeah, he looks terrible.
Days later, he canceled his remaining tour dates for that year, with management citing unforeseen health reasons. During a January 2023 appearance on a Beach Boys fan podcast, Wilson's daughter Carney reported that her father was probably not going to tour anymore, which she said was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
In January of 2024, Melinda, his second wife, died at their home. The following month, it was announced that Wilson had dementia and entered into another conservatorship.
Oh, man.
And in May of 2020, the guy can't take care of himself.
The guy can't get a break, man.
No. He completed 2 tracks as part of a forthcoming solo album produced by Joe Thomas and Jonathan Wilson, no relation to him. And before the project was abandoned following Thomas's death that April. So things are starting to unravel here. Okay. Brian Wilson would pass away June 11th, 2025, 9 days before his 83rd birthday. And his family did not really provide a lot of details, including a cause of death. We know that he was being taken care of. He had dementia, but there was also, he'd been struggling from long-term effects from COVID.
Oh, yeah? Oh, so he had long COVID.
He had long COVID. And Al Jardine would report right after his death that he was never really back after COVID. Like, he just was never the same again.
Never the same. I can see that happening. Some people, they get fucked up.
Yeah. So at the time of his death, Wilson left behind a substantial body of unreleased work, including the albums Adult Child and Sweet Insanity, okay, a large collection of 1980s demos and recordings created with Dennis Wilson, Gary Usher, Andy Paley, and Joe Thomas. Cows in the Pasture, the unfinished album he had produced for Fred Vale in 1970, is set to be released this year. I don't think it's been released yet.
He probably produced his daughter's thing, Wilson Phillips. Remember that?
Yeah, I did. Right. He was involved with that. Okay. Yeah. But that was a one-off thing. They weren't around for that long.
Nah.
I wouldn't say it was one-off. I guess they had a couple albums, but
yeah,
that was just that one period. There is going to be a docuseries coming out and about Vale and the album's making of Cows in the Pasture.
Wow.
So things are coming out. Okay. It should be very interesting what we see coming forward. Maybe the hamburger tapes and the cocaine tapes will get a proper remastering. Okay. It would be entertaining. Okay. And this is something that I think his legacy lives on. I think anybody that, is making pop music, even rock and roll, whatever. I mean, I've even heard hip hop artists be influenced by the Beach Boys. Say they are.
They are, man. Everybody.
It's something that it's American music at its core. Okay, that
I
early.
really want to hear the Brian Wilson rap song.
Yeah, maybe it'll come out. Hey, look, Lou Reed did a rap song.
Oh, yeah.
Dee Ramone did a rap album that classifies as one of the worst things ever recorded. That it's so bad it's awesome. Okay, and I mean, you could do something with that, but sad that he passed. He lived a long life, 82 years, almost 83, and he's left his stamp. I mean, what he said as a teenager, as a senior, when he wrote that essay, My Philosophy.
Yeah,
he did it, man. He said he wanted to make a name for himself in the music business.
And he did make a name.
Did it. So. He did it times a million. So that's all I got for you today, Mr. Rossi.
Wow, what a history class of
hour and a half.
Holy moly, man!
Now you know everything you need to know about Brian Wilson.
That's like an in that definitely the story, life, and time of Brian Wilson. My God,
Yeah,
what a life
yeah,
he's
he will be
lived.
missed. He will be missed. I mean, everybody from, I mean, on
McDonald's okay, we definitely miss him.
and I mean, everybody from Paul McCartney to
Yeah,
Keith Richards to a lot of all these people were putting out tributes, and everybody loved the music.
yeah.
So
So Mike, a good job, and people, we'll see you next time. We got a bunch of other stuff coming up in the coming
stay tuned
days.
for that. Hope everybody enjoyed the Rory Gallagher last
Yeah,
rock show that we did. We got a few coming up. I'll tell you what that is in a second.
I know we got one with Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah. I'm gonna okay, we're looking at the we recorded. I think by the time this comes out, you should be getting ready to put out the
Six
six
albums.
live albums that were
Yeah,
recorded with Madeline.
yeah.
Okay. In August, we're gonna do a podcast on the great Van Morrison. In September, we're gonna do a show on the Water Boys, band that were big for a little while in the late '80s, mid to late '80s. I believe they were from Scotland originally. I kind of like wanted to do this because I kind of rediscovered them in recent months, and I was like, wow, these guys had some great songs, and I fucking forgot all about them. Yeah. So October, we're gonna do Sly and the Family Stone. I am thinking about possibly changing that, Rob. I may want to do that for Black History Month coming up.
Oh yeah, that
We
might
might
be
do
good.
we might change that into a 2-part episode on Sly. I think he deserves that.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, we might do that. So I might substitute October with something else. November is going to be an interesting one. Legends of Psychobilly Music.
Wow.
Psychobilly, a little subsidiary of Rockabilly. We're going to talk about the crazy Hazel Atkins, the legendary Stardust Cowboy, who David Bowie was a fan of and called Ziggy Stardust based off of that name. Okay. And also the British psychobilly band, the Meteors.
Yeah, all right.
All right. And then December, we got our year-end show we do every year, so we got to plan that too.
Yeah, wow.
That's the rest of the year.
Coming. A lot of stuff is coming.
Yeah. All right.
People, remember,
don't get drunk.
Get
Get lumped up.
We'll see you next time.
Take care, people.